So our goal today is to wrap up Module 4. However, I am reorganizing the content a bit. I'm going to take some artistic license, and it's not a major adjustment since you have yet to review and engage Module 5 material. Yes? So I'd like to keep things simple for Module 4. I want you to understand that Module 4 is a segue to the last topic, which has to do with tools and controls. And one of the things that you're going to pick up on is that there's a lot of, we've been investigating the credentials, certifications, employment requirements generically, especially in organizations where technology is a centerpiece. What you'll realize is that a lot of personnel measures or personnel policies and procedures don't just apply to the IT shop, don't just apply to the cyber hires, but also to anybody that's hired in the organization, okay? Is there anyone here in our audience today that has completed CSC 243 Digital Communications and Networking? So anybody that's been through networking yet with me?
I did.
Okay, so we have a couple of people. Do you remember the 7 layers of networking? We would often refer to, yes, we would often refer to layer 8 as the user. So if 7 is the software, who uses the software? The user is layer 8. If you're going from hardware, layer 1, up through applications, layer 7, or, okay, if you're in the networking world exclusively and you're a real wirehead and you're a Cisco certified person who creates network backbones and telecommunication systems, then in your world, there's only 5 layers, and it's called the internet model, and it skips some of the other application development layers, like presentation layer. But either whether you have 5 layers or 7 layers, the point is that everybody refers to the next layer in rather mysterious terms. You won't see it in a technology manual. You won't see it in a textbook. But in the workplace, people talk about layer 8 all the time. In fact, we may have told you that IT shops and tech support are part of the problem for the cybersecurity dilemma because they have a nasty habit of making good people feel stupid. What am I saying? I'm not talking about the cybersecurity people. I'm talking about the help desk, the tech people in the ITS shop, right? We have this phenomenon where they have their own language. There are times where they have their own code and they're talking to each other about the goofy, hapless, clueless, brainless, mysterious user. And they use terms like ID10T in their help desk log to indicate that amongst themselves, this is like a signal to each other. It's like, oh, what we have here is an ID10T error or a user layer level, right? Error. There are kinder and more professional ways to relate that the problem is with the user. And I was smitten because I started reviewing all the tools and controls, right? All the things that are used to hack and all the things that are used to prevent hacking. That's what Module 5 is about. All the things that you would use to pry open the can to get at the food, and all the things that you would use to keep it from being exposed and losing your lunch, right? To use an analogy. That's what Module 5 is about. But it occurred to me that our textbook authors revised their book and added an awful lot about personnel. And that's because at the end of the day, the greatest tool of our adversaries is the layer 8 subject. It is the user who has been weaponized. And our last topic about personnel management and roles and qualifications and certifications and such You know, we've been talking about how the IT shop can hire a cyber person and they work in a supporting role, or how they can be part of the IT department, or how they can answer to different departments and actually hold the IT department accountable. And that whole technical arena is part of the dynamic of working a cybersecurity career. And the certifications matter, all of that matters. The bigger issue or bigger challenge has nothing to do with the technical people. It really has to, well, it has to do with the end user. And the simple truth is the hackers are much better at converting an unaware user into a weapon. When you look at Kali, and here I sit with Kali, and I was ready to go through a Swiss Army knife full of tools in Kali. I did some quick research, and not too long ago, they said that greater than 90%, greater than 90% of exploits begin with one of two activities: email or web browsing. That's it. 90%. 90%. So you can know Kali and you can be skilled at using those tools, and that's great. But the hackers are really, where they're really continue to bumfuzzle and stymie cyber professionals, is that they're still capable of getting inside the average user who is not aware, who doesn't realize. And we get back to, we come full circle to EAT. So you remember EAT, education, awareness, and training. Your textbook authors call it SETA, S-E-T-A, right? Which sounds a lot like SETI. And SETI has software clients that do matrix computing to help find aliens. I'm not making this up. And botnets are based on the same principle. There are matrix computing applications that yoke the spare CPU cycles and memory in every system. I'm juggling a lot of applications right now. In order to bring you into this class today, I have a browser open, I'm using PowerPoint, I have a Word document open, I'm running a virtual machine with a virtual system that's chomping away. I have a file explorer open. I'm also doing Zoom, and I'm recording this session. And see, here's the thing. I'm still just using half of my memory. Hello? I'm still just using half of my CPU, even if I push it. Hello? And that's just a 10-year-old laptop, right? Well, what am I getting at? Hackers, if they can get a foot in the door through email or on the web page that's corrupted, email message somebody responds to. That's it. 90% of our exposures are happening, which means the most effective tool for a hacker is actually layer 7. What some help desks refer to as an ID10T error, right? And you know, a user, it has to do with user area. Now, when a plane goes down and crashes, the first thing that the airline wants to do is blame who? The pilots. They want to blame the user, because if they can blame the user of that aircraft, then the aircraft manufacturer, Boeing, is off the hook, and the airline and their maintenance routine and how committed they are to performing preventive maintenance checks and services on their aircraft, they're off the hook, right? So if the problem can be identified to be a pilot error, that's really big. And you see this pattern repeating itself in some industries, but no more so than in the technology industry, and in particular, the IT department. Now, the average help desk can make an intelligent adult feel pretty stupid by the checklists and the drill that they put them through. And it's frustrating, especially when the person who's calling already has some technical expertise. And we've experienced this earlier. We had a situation where the network was down. One of our students was calling in for help. You remember this, right? Okay, there's a culture to this. And what I'm addressing here has to do with the soft part of cyber. It gets back to people. Culture is a function of collective, personal perspectives and attitudes. Culture is a collection, a conglomeration, right? A consolidation of the perceptions and attitudes of a population of users. And the simple truth is, the reason we're spending an entire module, and we've retooled the equipment here, I've simplified this module. We're just going to focus on people, layer 8. And that's what we're going to do in this module. On Monday, over the weekend, we're going to pivot, and I'm going to condense the material on tools and controls. Because in all honesty, I do not want to underemphasize how big the challenge here is, okay? So I'm in the process of revising the study guide. It'll be everything we have to do with personnel. And we left off around here talking about hiring issues, right? And this is just personnel hiring practices in general. So when you look at the concepts and details in chapter 7 in the slides, some of those are about the personnel, they're about the users, some are about the IT staff, some are about the cybersecurity professionals, right? And what I'd like to do is just make sure we don't miss anything important. So I want to go ahead here and finish where we started. The hiring issues, right? A contract. Once a candidate has accepted a job offer, now which kind of hire are we talking about? Ultimately, for our education, awareness, and training, we asserted something about cybersecurity. Who is responsible for cybersecurity ultimately in every organization? Where does that responsibility lie? It's everyone. It's the leadership, it's the IT department, it's the cybersecurity professionals, it's the users, it's everyone. Because ultimately everybody's a user, even cybersecurity professionals. Did you know that when cyber professionals are downloading the latest version of Kali, they have been hacked? Yep. Because they've downloaded tainted install images? They didn't go to the trouble of checking the hash with the download to make sure that it was untainted. This happens all the time, right? Now, a lot of things that have to do with effective cyber, we've said earlier this season, don't have to do with the actual tech, right? But let's face it, there are two things that all humans do most often. We get on the web, we get on the internet, and if we don't do a web page, we use an app. And the app is doing the same thing. When you look at your smartphones now that have all sorts of cool apps, you might not think of those as web applications, but they're really a front door to what's sitting out on the internet on the back end. So even though it's not a web browser that a user may be looking at on a smartphone app or a tablet app, right? It's still a light, watered down version of what somebody would encounter on a web page. If there's any network connectivity on the back end, you can consider it to be an internet web application of sorts. So if you're connected in any way, shape, or form to internet resources, internet data, internet communications, internet-based communications, you're on the global network and you're doing a lot of you're using a lot of systems and resources and data, right? Now, above all those separate apps, email is still like the absolute worst hole. And this is where, when you want to have better cybersecurity, you have to start with the hiring process. There has to be something in the contract, right? It says many security policies require an employee to agree in writing to monitoring and non-disclosure agreements, right? Now, which employees? Just the cyber employees? No, all of them. Because a finance person can put the entire books for an entire Fortune 500 company on a single thumb drive and give it to their competitor. That's the reality of the world we live in today. And one of the reasons that employment contracts are so important is because if you don't screen your employees first, your employees come with flaws. You need to know about those flaws. I'm not saying that you have to compromise their personal privacy, but if there's something that they could be embarrassed, we talked about this in our last session, didn't we? If there's something they can be embarrassed about, you want to know about it up front, because you don't want the hacker to embarrass them. You don't want the hacker to say, you know, it would suck to watch your mother die in an ICU. I know she has lung issues. Wouldn't $100,000 cash to settle all her medical bills and get her the surgery she wants work well for you? All you got to do is plug in this USB drive. That's all you got to do. That's all you have to do. And if somebody suddenly becomes a friend of yours and they're out of the blue and they happen to have a lot of the same hobbies you do, that would be your first clue that something's going on, right? That aspect of hacking is called social engineering. That's one human being exploiting another human being, entirely on layer 8, right? But they get their information and research online. So policies governing employee behavior may be classified as employee contingent upon agreement, where the employee must agree to conform to the policies before being hired. Remember, we were talking about having policies and then actually practicing the policies. How do you do that? In practical terms, it's the contract. If you have a contract that says, I agree to these terms and conditions of employment, I will perform the duties and roles assigned in the official job description, and I agree that I'm going to keep, I'm going to practice non-disclosure. You know, I'm going to be discreet in my affairs, right? Some people require non-compete agreements, which means I can't work for a place for 6 months, turn around, and then unload an entire dump truck of trade secrets to a competitor because the competitor decides they're going to pay me $20,000 more a year, right? So these are things you can't really protect against. A cyber professional has no protection, no prevention, no chance, no chance whatsoever countering someone who is corrupt. If they're good at acting the part and they're supposed to have legitimate access in order to do their job, by the time you find out something's happened, you're playing catch up, right? So by far, it's the personnel that is the greatest tool, and with the right education, awareness, and training program, they can be the greatest asset, right? They can be one of the controls. They can be people that report something unusual to you. You can require in the employee contract that if they neglect to report strange behavior on their screen, that is grounds for termination. Do you hear what I'm saying? Sure. I mean, I'm just saying that this is part of what the personnel and layer 8 piece is about. Levels of authorization should be outlined in training. Have we talked about the most common source of fraud in an organization when it comes to people stealing the cookies in the cookie jar? Embezzlement. You'd be shocked at what it is. Are you ready for this? Somebody starts with the finance department as a bookkeeper, or they have an accounting degree, or they've had job experience as an auditor, okay? And let's say that they are involved with the finances. What's supposed to happen is called a generally accepted accounting practices, or GAAP, GAAP. Separation of duties. Earlier this week, we talked about separation of duties. If you have somebody who takes in the money and receives payments from an organization, and then they also have access to pay out the bills, it means they have all the pieces they need to fake invoices with customers, receive payments, flip it, write checks out to a friend, accomplice, or themselves. And that's how a lot of embezzlement, how a lot of fraud happens, right? Now, how does that happen? It happens because the IT shop does not allow, it doesn't have constraints, it doesn't have controls, it doesn't understand the business. In our last session, we said that above all, the tail should not wag the dog. What we mean by that is IT and cyber should complement the process of the organization. If you are in an organization and you find out one person, it's like, oh, well, they cross-train in the finance department. And, you know, when so-and-so's on vacation, they write the payroll checks. And you're like, wait a minute, but aren't they the ones that receive all the payments from our customers? They're like, yeah, but we're short-staffed. You're like, okay, so let me see if I get this right. I'm going to have all the cyber tools, all the technology controls, all the proper authorization and permissions, but you're going to willingly give someone, willingly give someone the privileges and permissions and capacity on their computer screen to take in funds and disperse funds. What the heck, right? Now, a lot of times people will say, well, you're over dramatizing or whatever. No, you're not. You should be able to ask those hard questions. And you'd be shocked at how often somebody finds out, hey, no wonder we're losing money on our budget. Somebody's been siphoning off $50,000 a year, right? In little payments. It's called a salami attack. You don't draft a huge check. You find little ways to drain the blood, right? In any case, by the time the employees start, they should be thoroughly briefed on security components and their rights and responsibilities. What's a security component? It's just something as simple as this. A person is authorized to receive payments from customers. That's a security component and a right and responsibility. Here's the biggest disconnect in every organization. Do the cyber people get to control who makes the decisions for management in the finance department? Do they? Most of the time they don't. But here's what happens. They pick up on the fact that, hey, wait a minute, we don't have separation of duties. How is it you're giving this person access to do so-and-so? Well, it's only temporary. Somebody's on maternity leave. Okay, here's what we can do. You decide, does this individual make payments on behalf of the organization, or do they receive funds on behalf of the organization? You decide. If they're fulfilling a role for somebody who's not here, and that was, oh, receiving payments, then I'm going to close the door. I'm going to cut off the valve. I'm going to change the permissions and the privileges and the resources. So they can't write checks until your replacement comes back, until your temp hire comes, and they'll come up with every reason why it was a bad idea to hire you, because they're going to think you're into their Kool-Aid. What you need to understand and help them understand is that by far the greatest tool of any hack is not Kali, it's not hardware, it's not the network, it's not some virus or piece of software. It's a human being who uses the tech and they're not following basic common sense. All day long, we focus on the tools and the cool stuff and the firewalls and the exploits. And wow, I can turn 500 computers on their side and they can all bark a gigabit of data, junk data all at once. I can flood the network, I can crash the network. Oh, isn't that cool? That's not usually where the problems are. 90% of your users fall prey to what? Email or web access, some kind of internet access that's going on, right? And this is where, right, so on the job security training, we're dealing with a moving target. Cyber is a moving target. What are we saying? There is constant training, education, and awareness. Now, we just learned that the latest version of Server 2022 includes additional encryption for the Azure version of the server. So when you have a cloud server, you can encrypt the connection to your local server and protect your data that's traveling between here and the cloud. They just now added that. Not with the newest version, just with the latest cumulative update. That's a great example of how security controls can change on the fly all the time, which is why evaluating performance is important, right? So information security violations have to be documented. They have to be treated seriously. Termination. There is something called the sacrificial lamb syndrome. If an employee is terminated for a cyber violation, everybody will take cybersecurity seriously. If an employee is simply disciplined for a cybersecurity violation, then people will take cybersecurity seriously. If somebody does something in terms of a cybersecurity infraction, and basically it's like, well, they're not, look at me. Their friends, their coworkers are going to tell you, they're not that technical. Cut them some slack. If it's one thing you learn the entire program, all the years you take the courses here at UVI, don't you dare fall for that cop-out. Oh, somebody didn't know. Oh, somebody wasn't really technical. Oh, somebody wasn't smart enough. Oh, it's not really their fault. They're going to claim the ID10T thing. It's a different twist on it. What they're going to say is that you need to show leniency because they didn't know better. We're all paying higher light bills right now. WAPA lost $3.2 million that was wired to a Cayman Islands account. That event happened more than once.
Oh.
The issue we have here is that someone didn't take the very thing we're talking about today seriously. If you want to talk about hacker tools, before we get into the Kali stuff, before we get into the controls to protect ourselves, we got to talk about the human being, and we got to have plain talk about it. I'd like to know if the person that did this is still employed, if they're not wearing prison orange. And I hope every person in the U.S. Virgin Islands that's living here today in all 3 islands plays up this YouTube video and they think about what I'm saying here, because essentially there's a lot of foolishness that, you know what, this person, they're really not that technical. It's like, but let me see if I get this right. You gave them the tech, you gave them the software to use, you provided a login for them. They've been on the job for how long? But now you're going to say they're not technical enough, right? You have to be able to terminate. You have to be able to discipline. When you do this, you have to have the means to cut and change access on the fly. One of the worst things that can happen is a poor termination. So you are going to have issues where you have to discipline or terminate employees. That makes your cybersecurity program more effective. The simple truth is, if you don't have a way of dealing with the simple assets, right? These are all assets. Key issues. Keys are the physical access. Somebody gets access to the hardware, all it takes is a single thumb drive and they can have all the data they need, right? Logical and key card access is terminated. Employees are then escorted out of the building, right? Their belongings go with them. They have to be notified well in advance of the departure date, or do they? Well, friendly departures, including resignation, retirement, promotion, or relocation, that's okay. Yeah, you can plan for that. But oftentimes there are others that are waiting in the wings that are planning on what will happen when they get that person's access. So planning on how transitions occur, employees come and go at will, collect their own belongings, and leave on their own, right? As opposed to a forced termination. Now, forced terminations can happen because people downsize. That's not because they did something wrong half the time. It can be just because, well, we're going to downsize. Has everyone ever heard of what's going on at Twitter? Elon Musk is firing all the people at Twitter.
It's currently breaking.
Have you heard about this?
Yeah, he's fired like his contractors, half of the people that work full-time jobs in Twitter, he fired. And
Yeah.
gave other people an ultimatum. You work harder for longer hours or quit, and more people quit.
That's right. And so what you have is a case where people are stressing. You have somebody from the top with absolute authority, right? So what's happening is that there's a lot of transition. This is fertile ground for all kinds of malfeasance, right? The simple truth is a lot of times when terminations happen, it's rushed. It's not as organized. It pays to make sure people understand. You should be, everybody see this right here? Only by scrutinizing system logs after the employee has departed can the organization determine if there has been a breach or loss of information. Did you know that sometimes when people leave a job willingly or unwillingly, did you know they can still get on their office machine?
Oh, yeah.
Did you know they can still log into their email and pass email messages to others?
Yeah, because if people actually change their stuff, they still have access to everything. They still know all their.
Yeah. Sometimes they have hitchhikers too. The simple truth is an employee that is not long for this world, depending on the circumstances, that's an ideal opportunity for hitchhikers to tag along, and it could be completely innocent. What I'm saying is that transition with people is one of our greatest Achilles heels. When you have new employees and you haven't trained them to respond to email and web pages, you're in trouble. What's the percentage of late for the number of exploits that happen? What's the common vector for 90%? We just said at the beginning of the class, 90%. How is it hackers are gaining exploit and access privileges with most users?
Through emails and websites.
Through emails and connectivity online, right? Online websites and online connectivity and email. 90%. 90%. And most of it is innocent. Most people aren't aware, which is why you have to understand the dynamic here, right? Now, what task can be performed when an employee prepares to leave an organization? Answer: look at all of the different things. How many people have a checklist? Access to the organization's system has to be disabled. Removable media must be returned. What are we saying? Thumb drives. Now they may say, oh, that's my personal thumb drive. And you say, I had an employee once that was disgruntled and she had 60, 80 Microsoft installed disks from our subscription with Microsoft. And because she was involved in setting up systems, she thought that, well, she could just keep those when she left. It wasn't hers to keep, right? Hard drives have to be secured. File cabinet locks must be changed. Office door locks must be changed. Key card access revoked. Personal effects removed. Everybody's heard of a nanny cam, haven't you?
Yep.
A nanny cam. Did you know that a former employee that's really disgruntled could leave a nanny cam in the office and the new hire, who's clueless about what happened before, can be struggling on the screen? And lo and behold, the phone rings. And it's the former employee. And they strike up a conversation. It's like, oh, well, I'm sure you'll enjoy your new place there. It was one of the best places I ever worked. There's great people there. They can lie, right, with a new person, and they can say, you know, I left something in the office there. I was wondering if I could stop by, you know, and wow, you know, one of the best things that happened in my career path was hiring on with this company, right? They can BS somebody really effectively. All they have to do is gain their trust to the point where, I don't know, they let them in the office. Oh, but then the person has to go to the bathroom. So they leave them in their old office unattended, right? Or they're not aware that the nanny cam is active and they sit there and type. You do know that most cameras now are capable of capturing what you're typing into a keyboard from a distance, right? Okay. Here's the biggest thing we said before: separation of duties. Similar concept is known as two-person control Another control used to prevent personnel from misusing information. Here's a dumb question. How many administrative logins do IT people have where they only know half the password and someone else in the IT shop knows the other half of the password? I'm just asking.
Yo, what?
Or
That is
do help desk people get the admin password for every system they touch? It's the latter. Now, here's the fun part. Would you care to guess how many 6-year-old admin passwords are still in use and still valid on systems in an organization? I'm not mentioning names and I'm not talking about UVI specifically. But I'm not talking about UVI specifically, okay? I'm talking about every organization I've ever had everywhere I've lived. How many times do you think that password is still active? It's a lot of trouble to go through there and change that password. If it's set up a certain way so it's always there when you need it, the problem with that approach is when you need to change it, you have to go back through those same hoops to change it. There are better ways to establish administrative access on a system. Just saying, okay? Two-person control. Mandatory vacations give the organization the ability to audit the work of an employee. A lot of things bubble to the surface when someone isn't around. Why do you think your scenario with Sydney Corinth involved a leave of absence? You would have never known something was going on with Sydney Corinth. Had Sydney Corinth not been out of the office. Oh, Sydney Corinth is always using that computer like crazy. Oh, Sydney Corinth is a wild man on that computer. Always multitasking, always juggling. You know, we're always having to rebuild that system 2 or 3 times a year. Maybe some folks in IT have heard that before. Wow, we have to keep rebuilding some people's machines over and over again. Does that ring a bell for any of you tech support people? Yep, I'm willing to bet that it does. So here are the most important internal control strategies. And here's the part that you don't get, and most cyber people don't get. The administration and the management has to do this, but then you have to insist that they do this. Because they may do it and they start the process, but they don't understand how to implement that on a technical system. You do. That's the difference. They may have different ways of providing for internal control strategies. Here's a great example of a recent one I encountered at a very large organization here in the territory. Someone needed to make sure that they could use other people's machines when they were out sick. This was COVID. You with me? So someone got a folder and wrote down all the logins and all the passwords for all the systems, for all the people in the entire office. And then put the folder in a place where everybody had an access. They had a key to access the locked cabinet where it was. Everybody knew what the folder was. Everybody knew what was in the folder. Everybody had access. Oh, did I mention everybody had a copy of the security code to come into the building after hours? Nobody was reviewing the security access log to see if anybody was coming to the office after hours, okay? So those two things in particular, two-person control, splitting up separation of duties, right? That's a very important idea. And the thing that we're going to insist that you do for the rest of your career is to translate how that works best with a login and access to certain applications and data. So you have to translate the reality of how this works. What does it mean if somebody doesn't have access to both payment instruments and the ability to receive payments? It means that you either turn one on or one off, and there has to be some kind of safety in the mix on that technical system, or you won't mix it. Somebody on your help desk is going to go, oh, they're away on vacation. Oh, who's filling in? Oh, so they need access to so-and-so. Do you think the average help desk person is going to be aware of what their roles and duties and responsibilities are, or whether or not they have access in other areas? Absolutely not, right? You have to have certain things that are hardwired. So when the help desk person tries to add the permission, It doesn't work. It requires a domain admin or an enterprise admin, or it requires the technology lead to do, right? There have to be some things that are in place. So these are the types of things that, now, temporary employees and contract employees are a special category. A lot of times temporary employees become well-liked, contract employees become well-liked, and they become full-time employees, right? You have to have the same constraints, the same process, the same onboarding with temporary and contract that you do with others. A lot of people don't. And this is a huge problem. Nowadays, a lot of government positions, a lot of companies, they don't have the money to hire, but they pay somebody to come on temporarily, or they contract with them, right? So temporary employees supervisor must restrict the information. There actually has to be more detail, right? Check this one out. In a secure facility, all contract employees are escorted from room to room, as well as into and out of the facility. So that's the kind of thing that we don't really think about. Consultants. So we pay consultants a lot of money. Sometimes we don't check out their credentials. Yeah.
The previous one, when I was running that line tree, in order to go out into the actual like refinery area, you have to be escorted.
Right. Right. So Suleiman said that at Lime Tree, if you wanted to go into the actual refinery area, you had to be escorted, right? And that's a great example of a process and a protocol that kind of helps that.
The person that escorted you had to have a trip card.
Right. Right. So they had to have electronic, like a certificate or a CAC card, you know, they had to have.
It's a portal. So, and people who have trip cards are vetted out and their background is looked at.
Right, their background is looked at and all that kind of stuff. So business partners are another thing. You can hire business partners. Supply chain is a huge problem. So this last piece right here, to summarize, we talked about the different certifications. We talked about, at first, we talked about cyber professionals and their roles and responsibilities. But we would be really, well, asleep at the switch if we didn't talk about the rest of the personnel stuff, right? You got to integrate information security concepts through every aspect of employment policies and practices. I once saw a dean trying to conduct a meeting, and there was a member of faculty that had access to the screens and directories that were being referenced in the middle of the meeting. And for some reason, the access kept failing. And these messages about permission, access denied, that kind of thing kept coming up, kept coming up, kept coming up. When somebody's changing permissions on your system, you need to have a log. And this is a non-IT person, right? What I'm telling you is, I watched this happen and I knew what was going on. And the people involved were intelligent professionals, but they weren't IT people, they weren't cyber people. And I watched the rest of the meeting hop, skip, and jump all over the map, because every time somebody tried to reference something, it just mysteriously vanished in front of the screen. The meeting was awkward at best, right? Person that was doing this was sitting on the sideline with a keyboard under the desk, doing things with a smile on his face the whole time. So that's the kind of stuff that you need to be able to have certain logs and other stuff. We'll talk about logs and tools and other things on Monday. In any case, I appreciate your patience while we reorganize some content, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday for our last official class. We're going to blitz tools and controls on Monday. We'll have some companion videos for you to watch. I have a very simple thing for you to do for a single assignment before we put the assessment for module 4 in front of you. So I'm gonna finish the draft of the module study guide. Then I'm gonna have one quick assignment for you to do. And then early next week, we'll finish up the last module. It'll be a 1-day shotgun wedding of sorts for our controls and tools. If you do not have a Kali, and this is really important here, if you do not have a Kali, a working Kali system, at a minimum, you need to be able to do this by Monday. Everybody needs to be able to do this by Monday. I want everyone to have your virtual machines, your Kali machines. I want everybody to be able to do this and follow along on their screen as we walk through this screen. Okay? Okay. All right. We'll see you then, and have a good weekend. And bye-bye for now.